So my fiance went and bought some markers, bunch of cool colors. Let's see if this works here. Huh, would you look at that? What is up, guys? So today we are back with another deep dive of a Pokemon that has been kind of requested pretty frequently here lately. So without wasting any time, let's go ahead and get into it. So Alolan Dugtrio is a ground and steel type Pokemon. It does max out at level 40 with 15s across the board at 1897 here. So very respectable CP for the Great League. I actually really do like that number. We can achieve a 1499 at level 30 if we have a 0 on attack, 12 defense, and 15 stamina there. Now, according to my spreadsheets and all the math that I have done, you can put Alolan Dugtrio around 95th in bulk and 88th in stat product. And to be honest, I think this is probably one of the worst that we've looked at. So 95th is really, really low. So there's about 115, 116 participants in the Kingdom Cup, and 95th means that we're really like drawing from the bottom of the barrel there. I mean, you're getting close to like regular Alolan Diglett, Magby, and Smoochum, and you're getting really, really low there. 88th in stat product here again. That is better than 95th, of course, and it's honestly because Alolan Dugtrio just has a nice attack stat actually, but it isn't enough to really pull him up into the high ranks with all of the other Pokemon. But as we've seen, this does not necessarily dictate that this is a bad Pokemon because their moves can bring them back, so let's actually get into that. So considering that we are ground and steel type here, I do have all of our moves color-coded for stab effect. Starting with our fast moves though, we do have Metal Claw and we have Mud Slap. Unfortunately, it's not Mud Shot, but it is Mud Slap at least. It's a decent ground move. We would have liked to see Mud Shot here, but it's all good. So Metal Claw actually gaining 3 energy per turn for 2.5 damage per turn, and Mud Slap gaining 2.67 energy per turn for 3 damage per turn. Now, interestingly, what I found about these two moves is that even though Metal Claw does gain you more energy per turn, you're only forfeiting a third of an energy to go with Mud Slap. But you gain half a damage more per turn. So I was like, well, you know, that's not really that too big of a spread. I'm sure that Metal Claw will just actually end up getting us to these moves faster, which will end up making us do better. But that's not the case. Everything that I found points to Mud Slap actually being the better of the two moves here. And I think it's really just because in this cup, a lot of Pokemon are just really hurt by these ground type moves. And I think that's kind of what gives Alolan Dugtrio a slight edge in a lot of these cases. So moving on to our charge moves, we do have Earthquake, Mud Bomb, and Iron Head. Mud Bomb is nice to see there, and actually Iron Head isn't too bad behind it with its energy. And Earthquake, of course, we always love to see Earthquake on any Pokemon here. So Earthquake actually costing 65 for 120 damage at a 1.5 ratio. Mud Bomb costing 40, doing 55 for a 1.38 ratio. And Iron Head costing 50, doing 70 damage for a 1.4 damage per energy ratio there. So pretty respectable numbers here. Earthquake is of course our most efficient move, but Mud Bomb and Iron Head are both very, very quick, and that's kind of what we need on Alolan Dugtrio. Even though his attack stat is extremely high, it would be really beneficial to have Earthquake on Alolan Dugtrio, but the problem is that because his bulk is just so low, he doesn't survive long enough in a lot of matchups to even get to Earthquake. So it really starts to put him behind. Based on everything that I've ran, all the simulations that I run, Mud Slap, Mud Bomb, and Iron Head should kind of be a benchmark moveset for you to work with, only because it does end up winning you the most matchup spread out of all of the movesets. And I think that's honestly what I'm going for here. So let's actually move on to a shield type situation. So in a scenario where I have 0 shields and my opponent has 0 shields, we actually end up winning 38.5% of the matchups. So you can kind of consider this like a closing situation. Only 38.5% is pretty low, but what we hope to see is even if the closing situation is low, we want to see a really good opening situation. So in a situation where 2 shields versus 0 shields, so in a scenario where I have 2 and my opponent has 0 shields, we actually end up winning 73.1% of those matchups. Now the whole reason that we do this simulation is literally just to figure out which Pokemon are just going to flat out beat us. Because I have 2 shields, I want to know what's just going to beat me, because even though I have 2 shields, I can't defend myself. Well, there was quite a lot. Being that we win only 73.1% of those, there were a ton of Pokemon that were in here, and I kind of found a common theme amongst a lot of these Pokemon. So basically, Water, Fire, Grass, and Fighting all showed up. But it wasn't necessarily the typings that were a big deal, it was the fact that their moves were faster than ours. Even though we only have 40 energy to fire off a Mud Bomb, we still aren't even doing 3 energy per turn with Mud Slap, so we're kind of slow. That's going to take us at least 12 to 13 seconds, if I'm doing my math right. That's a lot. That's a lot of time to even get to Mud Bomb, which is pretty slow. So the only reason that we actually end up losing a ton of these matchups is because other things are just faster than us. And then on top of that, you compound that Water type is going to be super effective to Alolan Dugtrio. Grass type, Razor Leaf is a big issue amongst a lot of people, whether you're weak to it or not. Fire type, going to be pretty bad. Fighting type, going to be pretty bad. I mean, you can kind of see, like, there are several things that not only are they faster than us, but they also have a really high damage output towards us. So, kind of sucks. Next scenario is 0 shields versus 2 shields. So in a situation where I have no shields and my opponent has 2 shields, 14.1% of those matchups. Now, why do we actually run this? Well, this is kind of figured up to be the what Pokemon do we just outright beat no matter how many shields they have. And there's a common theme amongst these as well. A lot of steel types end up showing up here. So like Aggron, Magneton, and Melmetal. We just have a lot of ground type damage to really push out amongst those steel types to really do a lot of super effective damage, which ends up helping us a lot. So in a scenario where I don't have any shields and my opponent has 2 shields, it's nice to know that I can have a pretty large section of a type at least covered when it comes to steel typings. Our last scenario here is whenever we have 2 shields versus 2 shields, so in a lead-off situation, 32.1%. Unfortunately, that's even lower than a closing situation at 38.5%. So, what does that kind of tell you? Well, it kind of tells you that Alolan Dugtrio doesn't really like to go up against things that have shields. Considering how low in bulk we are, if a Pokemon is able to shield what little damage we can actually output, we just don't have the bulk to survive long enough if they have any shields. So, in the scenario where you're closing, you definitely do have a better percentage win over when you're opening, so I guess it would make more sense to use Alolan Dugtrio as a closer. But let's figure out which Pokemon actually have a hard time with Alolan Dugtrio here. So, in all of the deep dives, I end up taking our subject Pokemon and putting them up against the top 10 bulkiest Pokemon in the cup and trying to figure out how good we actually do against the bulk. And Alolan Dugtrio really surprises me here. So let's go over our losses first. So we lose to Dugong, Altaria, Lapras, Skarmory, and I included Lucario in here because he's one of the kings, but we do also lose to Lucario. Now we also do tie against Steelix, which I consider that like a loss because we're both losing a Pokemon. But we do end up tying against Steelix, which is kind of an interesting one. Now, as far as what we win against, here's the cool stuff. Bastiodon actually shows up as a really good win. Registeel, Regice, Probopass, and Torkoal are all in our win column. So we have really good matchups actually against some of the meta. And it's really nice to see that Alolan Dugtrio can handle at least one of the kings. But as you saw on the other side of the list, both Lucario and Lapras we do end up losing to. Now, in terms of what counters Alolan Dugtrio, I'm thinking about like what Pokemon do you need to put on your team if you are expecting Alolan Dugtrio to show up, and what Pokemon should you be really targeting whenever it comes to Alolan Dugtrio? What should be your focus? Well, in the scenario of preparing to take on an Alolan Dugtrio, I definitely think that you should focus on two different typings, water and fire. And not necessarily have those typings, but have those type moves in your arsenal. Things like Lapras, Dragonair, and Empoleon all do really well up against Alolan Dugtrio to exploit his water weakness. As well as fire, things like Castform, Charizard, and even Magby. Yep, I threw that in there. Magby can actually just straight up beat Alolan Dugtrio. Think about that. That's crazy. It has like, I'm pretty sure Magby in the simulation was using like low sweep, but it literally could just get to its charge moves faster than Alolan Dugtrio could, and I mean it was nuts. That's so crazy. So funny stuff. But either way. So what should you actually be focusing your attention on whenever you're using Alolan Dugtrio? Well, here's kind of an obvious one. Steel typings. Things like Bastiodon, Melmetal, and Bronzong all have a really hard time getting over Alolan Dugtrio here. But also the fire typing. Yeah, it's kind of split down the middle. Some of the fire types could really hurt you, but I think it's mainly the ones that are faster than you. If you actually get up against a fire type that's not quite as fast, you actually have a lot of advantage over it. So Alolan Marowak actually shows up in this list, which is interesting because I think it's just because he's doing resisted damage and it's not able to push enough like actual damage to you, so you just end up overwhelming it with ground type damage. And then Torkoal shows up in this list, which Torkoal we found is kind of a slower Pokemon. And then you as well have Camerupt, which of course, Camerupt is not a top tier fire type Pokemon by any means, but he is pretty slow, so it ends up making him a really bad matchup. So you should really target Camerupt with Alolan Dugtrio here. Now let's actually move on to some pros and cons. So I have 2 cons and 1 pro. Our first con is that it's super flaky. So beings that were so slow and beings that we have such little bulk, we just end up becoming really flaky. So if you can imagine, you can throw out a Alolan Dugtrio and there are certain Pokemon that you're just gonna shine up against. Your opponent's gonna be like, holy cow, I was not expecting a Alolan Dugtrio to be that good. But then there's also those matches where you're going to throw out a Alolan Dugtrio and get stomped in like 4 or 5 turns and it's just going to kill you. And they're going to be like, holy cow, I can't believe this guy brought a Alolan Dugtrio. So it's super flaky. Some matchups it does really well. Some matchups it does really bad. And the number of like matchups in the middle aren't really that great. Like it either does really good or really bad, and there's kind of like a small middle ground but not a whole lot. So you're super flaky and it really just kind of depends on the matchup. Our other con is that you actually do end up losing to 2 of the kings, that being Lapras and Lucario. Both of those can just output a ton of damage that really ends up giving you a lot of trouble. Lapras having Water Gun and Surf, it's a no-brainer up against the Alolan Dugtrio. Lucario having Counter and Power Up Punch, of course that's also a no-brainer. Unfortunately, we do lose to both of those. But as far as our cons go, we actually do end up winning against Bastiodon, so that's a big one. Bastiodon's a nice counter to have under your belt. If you can beat Bastiodon, not too shabby. It's not the king to beat in my opinion. I think Lucario is more important to have a counter for, but hey, beating Bastiodon is not anything to bat an eyelash at. So that is actually all I have for Alolan Dugtrio, guys. I would not recommend putting it on my team. It's too flaky. I feel like there are better ground type attackers out there. It just, unfortunately, it's not got the bulk to back up such a really interesting moveset. If it had Mudshot, maybe it would be doing a lot better. If it could get to these charge moves way faster, I could see that working out. But unfortunately, I personally can't recommend it. But I want to know what you guys think. Would you actually use Alolan Dugtrio on your team? How do you think it does? What have you found out in your testing? Please let me know down in the comments below. And also remember that if you have any Pokemon that you're looking forward to a deep dive on, let me know down there as well. I'll be happy to look into it for you. So that is actually it for today, guys. Thank you so much for watching. If you like to like videos, make sure you do that. If you don't, you can be that guy. Otherwise, let me know what you have to say down in the comments below. And until our next video, I will catch you then.